It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, it is the one most adaptable to change. Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. A man who dares to waste 1 hour of time has not discovered the value of life. If I had my life to live over again, I would have made a rule to read some poetry and listen to some music at least once every week. The mystery of the beginning of all things is insoluble by us, and I for one must be content to remain an agnostic. The love for all living creatures is the most noble attribute of man. A scientific man ought to have no wishes, no affections, a mere heart of stone. I love fools' experiments. I am always making them. The highest possible stage in moral culture is when we recognize that we ought to control our thoughts. The question of whether there exists a creator and ruler of the universe has been answered in the affirmative by some of the highest intellects that have ever existed. Man tends to increase at a greater rate than his means of subsistence. In the long history of humankind, and animal kind, too, those who learn to collaborate and improvise most effectively have prevailed. To kill an error is as good a service as, and sometimes even better than, the establishing of a new truth or fact. A true naturalist is a man who knows everything about something, and something about everything. I am not apt to follow blindly the lead of other men. What a book a devil's chaplain might write on the clumsy, wasteful, blundering, low, and horribly cruel works of nature. A scientific man ought to have no wishes, no affections, a mere heart of stone. It is always advisable to perceive clearly our ignorance. The more one thinks, the more one feels the hopeless immensity of man's ignorance. A moral being is one who is capable of reflecting on his past actions and their motives, of approving of some and disapproving of others. I cannot persuade myself that a beneficent and omnipotent God would have designedly created parasitic wasps with the express intention of their feeding within the living bodies of caterpillars. The fact of evolution is the backbone of biology, and biology is thus in the peculiar position of being a science founded on an unproved theory. Is it then a science or a faith? In the struggle for survival, the fittest win out at the expense of their rivals because they succeed in adapting themselves best to their environment. I have called this principle, by which each slight variation, if useful, is preserved, by the term natural selection. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, it is the one most adaptable to change. A scientific man ought to have no wishes, no affections, a mere heart of stone. The grand question which every naturalist ought to ask himself is, why do I believe in the truth of these few plain laws? To suppose that the eye with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection, seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest possible degree. If the misery of the poor be caused not by the laws of nature, but by our institutions, great is our sin. An American monkey, after getting drunk on brandy, would never touch it again, and thus is much wiser than most men. I am turned into a sort of machine for observing facts and grinding out conclusions. I have no great quickness of apprehension or wit which is so remarkable in some clever men, for instance Huxley. The very essence of instinct is that it's followed independently of reason. I see no good reasons why the views given in this volume should shock the religious feelings of anyone. A mathematician is a blind man in a dark room looking for a black cat which isn't there.